Hey all, good morning. I'm so glad to be here with all of you this morning. How many of you have or previously had a motorcycle? I know we are in Harley-Davidson. Yeah, a lot of hands went up. I know we're in Harley-Davidson territory up here, as I've learned, so I kind of expected that response. So how many of you have young kids in the family? Whether it's your kids or relatives' young kids, right? A lot of you. Okay. So to you, I want to ask you something, and I want you to keep in mind those little ones that you love so dearly. How many of you would let those little ones that you love, without any help, all by themselves, ride your motorcycle? No, that's what I thought. No, you'd probably start them off with something like this. Maybe when they're ready, they'll work up to this, and then this, with the training wheels and everything. And then maybe when they're ready, the training wheels will come off, and they'll ride that one all on their own. You know, I remember the time that I rode a bike without the training wheels for the first time. I was pretty terrified, to be honest, so I kept the training wheels on for probably a little longer than maybe I could have. But one day, my parents wanted to test me, to, get me to take them off one day. So one day they took off the training wheels and we went outside and we gave it a shot, see how it goes. Well, we started off slowly. We rode in the grass, which probably made it a lot harder. But I didn't want to fall on the asphalt, so we rode in the grass. And then on top of that, my dad, he was kind of like behind me like this, and he was holding me while I was pedaling the bike so that I could get used to what it felt like to balance on my own. And he could be there if I started tipping off one way or the other. So we tried this for a little bit that evening, and I got more and more comfortable learning to do it. So I started to go a little bit faster and pedal a little bit harder, and eventually I start going a little bit faster than my dad can run to keep up with me. So, of course, he has to let go. He can't keep up. So, without me even knowing, he's no longer holding on. And I'm biking all by myself without the training wheels. Eventually, I look behind me and I see now that he's way behind me. I think, if I remember right, I freaked out and fell. But anyways, that's to say, about fast forward maybe 15, 20 years from now, and I have a motorcycle of my own. This was actually a COVID project of mine. I bought this 2014 Sportster 883, and I fixed it all up, and I made it mine. Anyways, happy birthday, Dad. It is actually his birthday today, so I'll let that story kind of marinate with all of you while we get started today, and hopefully it'll click at some point why I told it to all of you. So today we're getting into the book of James. James is a New Testament letter, and New Testament letters are, letters. Letters written by someone to a body of believers to help them, right? And often they are written in the style of discourse, meaning that they're going to start with an argument, and they're going to go about trying to kind of prove it by answering questions and going through a step-by-step argumentative process. But like any good letter, it first starts off by saying who it's from and who it's to. James 1:1 says this: "This letter is from James, a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm writing to the 12 tribes, Jewish believers scattered abroad. Greetings." Okay, we'll take that one step at a time. First of all, it says it's written by James. Which James? Right? There's two apostles named James, so maybe it's one of them. Right? They were nicknamed Big James and Little James. Actually, I think maybe one of them's out there today. There he is. I knew he was out there somewhere. Well, is it one of them maybe? Maybe it's one of those two apostles? Actually, no, we don't believe it was one of them. We actually believe this was James, the half-brother of Jesus. Or if you're Catholic or from a Catholic background, stepbrother of Jesus. Interestingly, we know from the Gospel of John that Jesus' siblings and family weren't initially in support of his mission and his ministry and all that he was doing. But at some point, James must have come around and given his life to Christ, because by the time we get to the book of Acts, we find that James, the brother of Jesus, is actually a head leader in the church at Jerusalem. Of course, being a head leader at the church of Jerusalem, he could have introduced himself as such when he introduces himself in this letter. I mean, at this point in time, Jerusalem was essentially the headquarters for the mission of the gospel. So that's a really high position to be in. But no, he introduces himself instead as a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. A lot of English translations will instead translate this as servant. But as David Nystrom says, this is simply because our understanding of the term slave has been heavily and unfortunately colored by the American experience, a model that bears almost no resemblance to slavery in the Roman Empire. Now, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying that this model is better than that one or any model is good at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. The thing that I'm trying to say is that our experience of it makes it so that when we read this verse, we don't really understand what James is trying to tell us. The Roman version of slavery, the one that they would have been accustomed to, didn't have anything to do with race at all. And really, it wasn't something that a lot of the time people were forced into either. In fact, a lot of people, most people, would actually sell themselves into slavery to pay off a debt or to learn a trade or a skill. And they knew that once that debt was paid off or once that skill was learned, that they'd be set free again. So when James calls himself a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, he's not saying, I've been forced into this, or it's degrading, or anything like that. He's actually saying that this is him declaring he's placed complete loyalty in God. He's put aside him and his own desires and his own will, and he's saying, no, your will first. I'm giving myself away to you and to the service of your mission, to you and your will. And he's saying that he has great humility before him. And then we see that James is writing to, quote, the 12 tribes, Jewish believers scattered abroad. Now, there's a lot that could be said here, but for our purposes, what's important to know is that he's writing this to a group of Jewish Christians, presumably ones who have been in very hard times for a good period of time. And to these Christians, James wants to ask a question to which I now present to all of you. How many of you have ever felt beaten down by the hardships and the trials of life? How many of you have ever felt at the end of your rope or down and out? Maybe you're currently there. Now, come on. If every hand isn't raised or if every person isn't thinking that, I want to talk to you. I mean, I can't imagine not having ever had a hardship in your life. So what does James want to say to us? To those of us who are in trials, to those of us who are beaten down by the hardships of life? Well, he starts by saying this. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, whether they be minor inconveniences or life-shattering issues, anywhere along that spectrum, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Wow. Okay, thanks. Thanks for that one. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He knows he's writing to a group of Christians who are just in awful times, awful situations, and this is the first thing he says to them? I mean, what a great pep talk, honestly. Okay, so we'll humor you. Why should we consider our troubles? Why should we consider our troubles a great joy, James? Well, he continues. We should consider our troubles a great joy, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete and needing nothing. Let's start with this word, tested, testing. Now, this testing is not negative. It's not to make you fail or anything like that. This kind of testing that James is referring to is actually a positive kind of testing, the type of testing that is made to build up, to grow with the hope of succeeding, right? For any athletes out there today, think about it like a coach giving their athlete or their team a serious challenge and hoping that they will rise to it, hoping that they'll overcome it and become better as a result. You know, show me what you're made of. Or think about it like an engineer who's testing a new product and making sure that it's ready for real-world application, or ready to be sold on the store shelves, or if it needs to go back for further refinement or revision. These trials, they test our faith. not to break it down, not to make it fail, but actually to do the complete opposite, to build it up, to make it grow, to make sure that it's ready for the next bigger challenge. Think about it this way. A little over a year ago, Leah and I were in one of the biggest trials of either of our lives individually or together. We had just been married, and things weren't exactly going how we thought they would. You know, Leah wasn't able to find a full-time chaplaincy position that year, and I was still in school. So we were working this just myriad of different part-time jobs, kind of trying to stay afloat. But that was okay, and we honestly kind of knew that going into the marriage. We kind of knew that we'd have this 6-month or so period where things are hard, but that was okay because at the end of it, you know, I would be ordained as a minister, as a pastor, and I would graduate from school and I would start work at a local church. But that all kind of fell apart very quickly after our marriage, actually. My ordination had been pushed off due to circumstances beyond really my control, and there weren't really as many churches hiring as we thought there might be. Well, we could have given up. We could have just said, this is it. This is clearly not right. I'm going to go pick up a trade, and I don't know, you go do something else, and we'll go a different direction. Even though we knew that wasn't what God wanted for us. So we didn't. We knew what God wanted for us, and we stayed the course. We decided that despite how hard things were, and despite the fact that it didn't seem like it was going to get any better anytime soon, that we were going to stay the course, that we were going to stay faithful to God and to lean on His strength to get us through it. And so we did that. We continued. And fast forward not even a month or two, and I get a few calls from up north. I say up north because we were living in Kentucky at the time. The first call was from one Samuel Paget, who you guys might not really know, but he's a member of the Board of Ministry here in the Great Lakes and in Wisconsin. And he told me that maybe they could work out my ordination this year, which they ended up doing. And the other call was from one Creighton K. Asking to interview not just me, but to our surprise, Leah as well. This trial, this testing in our lives, it strengthened our faith in God. We had head knowledge beforehand that told us, you know, God's bigger than this. God can get us through it. But after it, we had heart knowledge that told us we know God can get us through this. If He can get us through that, what can't He get us through? James wants to tell us this. When trials and testings come your way, don't let it beat you down. Instead, see it as something that is building up your faith in God. Going back to our previous verses, that's not the previous verses. Going back to our previous verses, James says that these grow or mature your faith, and that the goal is to be fully developed. The language that James is using here is literally like a baby growing into a fully grown adult. And so just as a baby at some point fully develops, James is saying that our faith too should fully grow, fully develop, even to the point, as James says, as being perfect and complete. Now, I'm sure there's maybe a few alarm bells that went off right now, so let me explain. Perfect here is not saying that we as humans can be perfect, that we can have the ability to work and become morally uncorrupt. We've all heard this story a million times. You know, we're sinful and we're fallen, and there's nothing that we can do apart from God's grace for that to change, for our hearts to be worked on and become better. But perfect doesn't always have to relate to moral issues. And further, perfect changes its meaning based on what is being described to be perfect. In modern English, perfect means excellent or complete beyond practical or theoretical improvement, exactly fitting the need in a certain situation or for a certain purpose. The Greek is mostly the same, but a little bit different, teleos. It means attaining an end or a purpose, complete, or in other words, mature or whole. Again, kind of leaning into that language of developing and growing up and maturing. So when James is not saying that we as humans can be sinless, even if we should strive to be so. He's saying that our faith is to be perfect. He's saying that our faith is to be perfect in the sense that it is complete and undivided towards God. Because again, perfect is saying that something is complete and that it's fulfilling its purpose with excellence. So if I say that I have a perfect screwdriver, would that mean that it's without sin? No. It means that it's perfect or excellent at its purpose of screwing screws. We as humans can't be perfect, but our faith could be if it is single-mindedly pointed towards God. There's actually theological terms for this. We believe that once we're saved, God gives us what we call sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace is the grace that works on our hearts to purge it of sin, to change our desires and point them instead of at the world and at ourselves, and instead point them at God. At some point, when this grace has worked on us enough, we believe in entire sanctification, which is the idea that our heart is no longer now divided between ourselves and the world and God, but now it's pointed just at Him. How does that work? Well, let's give it a shot. What is this? A chair. How do you know that? I mean, I guess it kind of looks like a chair. It's got that, I don't know, pumpernickel-ish hue, maybe? It kind of feels like a chair. I mean, I guess I could try it. If it's a chair, I should be able to sit on it, right? Okay. Wait, how do I know it's going to support me? How do I know it's not going to collapse on me and I'm going to fall to the ground and make a fool of myself and be recorded online? I mean, I guess I could try it. Okay. Wow. I guess it is a chair. Wow, you know, actually, I think I can trust it now. When I go to sit on it next time, I think I can lean on it, put my full weight on it, and it's going to support me. I mean, how many of you, when was the last time that any of you thought about that? When was the last time that you, going to sit in a chair, had doubts or hesitations? How many of you, when you came in here just a minute ago for worship and to hear me preach, thought about that when you sat in your chair? No. You had full faith in it to support you when you leaned on it. You just knew and you acted on that. Could you imagine having a faith like that? A faith that, like, sitting on that chair, there's no doubts or hesitations that He'll be there for you when you lean on Him. How many of you all have been on missions trips and just experienced people living in the absolute worst living situations? How many of you have seen that people like that can have that faith? Exactly. They have that kind of faith because every day they're leaning on Him and His strength to get through it. Every day they know He's going to be there because He's been there. He's been there for them every day. Why would He not be there for me tomorrow? Now, this all sounds great. You know, when you're not in hard times and you're hearing all this and you're thinking about it, you're like, of course. Next time hard times hit, I'll absolutely do that. But then the hard times come and you're freaking out and you're panicking and I got to do this and I got to do this and I don't have time for that and so on and so on and so on. So for those in hard situations, James has a few pointers. First of all, when you're really struggling and about to tap out, when you're at the end of your rope, James says that we're to ask God for wisdom. Ask for the type of wisdom that helps us see things from God's perspective. There's a contrast that James makes here. He says that our God is generous. More literally, this word is unwavering or single-minded towards us. In other words, God is single-mindedly pointed towards us in everything. He'll give it to you without rebuke and without judgment when you ask him for it, which is contrasted by us, who waver between our loyalties, between ourselves and God and the world, and as a result, we're tossed around like something in the sea, pushed about by the waves and the winds. As a result, James says that we're unstable, divided between our loyalties. So when you're at the end of your rope, ask God for wisdom in full faith that he'll give it to you. Second, James doesn't want us to compare our situations to those around us. He doesn't want us to look at someone else and say, if I had, their circumstances, or if I had their money, or et cetera, et cetera. So James says here, believers who are poor. Now, this word poor doesn't always mean speaking financially. Sometimes it does. Certainly, James was writing to at least some believers who were financially poor, but it's also referring to social outsiders, people like tax collectors and prostitutes, and those of low social status, like those with disabilities or orphans or widows or something like that. He's saying that those in those circumstances, those who are poor, should be humbled. They should be so happy about these circumstances God has put them in, because their circumstances is an arena, a crucible, if you will, in which their faith can be tested and grow and develop. While those who are rich should be happy that God is giving them a chance for their faith to grow and develop, when maybe it hasn't had much of a chance to do so beforehand. The third important note that James wants to take home with us is that we should never blame God for our temptations. Now, there's a distinction. Remember, testings were positive, to build up, to grow for the purpose of succeeding. Temptations are the opposite. Temptations are meant for breaking down, for destroying, for hopefully seeing the one who's being tempted fail. James says that we can't blame God for that, because God is never tempted to do wrong and thus never tempts anyone. Instead, our temptations can only be blamed on us and our own desires, which, as James says, entice us and drag us away. Now, there's another contrast James is setting up. We talked about before about our faith growing and developing and eventually becoming fully developed. We're here, again, going back to that language of literally like a child being born and developing. He says, if instead we give into our temptations to give up, if we give into our desires, those desires give birth, like a human baby being born, to sinful actions. And when those sinful actions fully mature, fully develop, they give birth to death. Death that's not physical, like in the Garden of Eden, but instead something much worse: separation from God. So instead of blaming God for our troubles, we should realize that he loves us, that we're his prized possession, and that every good and perfect gift is from him, and that he only wants us to see us succeed. So to summarize, up to this point, James says when the trials come, consider it an opportunity for growth, for maturing. When you're tempted to give up, ask God for wisdom. And don't blame it on other people or on God. Think of it like the bike. You start with the small challenges and you work your way up to the bigger ones. If you do all of this, and you make it through to the very end, through all the trials and the testings of this world, James says that you will receive the crown of life. This crown is both a mark of honor, but it's also the gift of eternal life in heaven with him. Paul often uses the analogy of finishing the race well, which could work here, but most likely some scholars think that instead James has in mind the metaphor of a fight. Think of it like a boxing match, where you're the underdog and being thrown into this impossible battle. For anyone who doesn't know what this is a shot from the movie Cinderella Man, True story from the Great Depression. Funny enough, actually, this guy on the left, the main character, his name is James. James Braddock. I didn't choose it because of that. I chose it because I think it does a really good job of explaining this, right? In the Great Depression, this guy, he's beaten down by so much, not just in his fights, but by the world and by all these things that are going on. But he doesn't let them beat him down. He learns from these things. He grows from them. Each smaller battle prepares him for the next bigger one until eventually he gets to the big battle. Eventually you get to the big battle where you take on the trials and the testings and all the things of this world, myriad as they are, and you come out the victor, where you receive the crown and you're honored in the next life, where you're greeted by the one at the gates, hands it to you. And he says, "Well done. Well done, good and faithful servant." Now, I know I just gave this analogy of the fight, but it seems even Paul and James realize that it's not a perfect analogy. And that's for one really important reason. Can you guess what it is? It's because God has already won the fight for us. He came down and he took on the trials and the testings of this world head on, and he succeeded. When he died on that cross, it wasn't a loss. That was the moment he was crowned the victor. Our part in the fight is simply to trust him and to lean on his strength to get through the punches.